Well, something I think every single one of us can relate to, or we could tell a story, regardless if you're a Christian or if you're a follower of Jesus or not. All of us have had this experience with what we call a dose of reality. And there's lots and lots of stories we could talk about in terms of, hey, here's when I experienced a dose of reality. Here's what that felt like. Here's what that looked like. Perhaps when you dated him and all of a sudden you had one expectation and then you had that dose of reality. Or maybe when you got married, you were like, man, I think it's going to be utopia the whole time. And marriage is going to be a honeymoon state the whole time. And then you're like, oops, dose of reality. Or perhaps you had kids and you thought, man, kids are going to be financially beneficial. It's going to be a piece of cake. And you're like, nope, big dose of reality there, right? I mean, we've all experienced that dose of reality in our lives. Or maybe for you, maybe you can relate to this one. Maybe you're, with a friend, or maybe with a coworker, or maybe with your husband or wife, or maybe you're on a date. And maybe you feel like the date's going well and, the chemistry's happening and there's a connection. And then all of a sudden, she's just like looking at you kind of odd. And she's getting all fidgety and she begins to play with her teeth a little bit. And you're like, what is going on? And then all of a sudden she says, man, this is kind of awkward, but maybe you need to go to the restroom and check what's happening right here because you have a big one of these right here. You guys ever had that happen? And I'm telling you, lettuce, it can get in there and it can get deep and it can contrast with your white teeth. And you're like picking at it and you're like, it's kind of weird. Anyways, I won't go any further on that. But, you've had that dose of reality. And I've also experienced this in my life. In fact, something that's happened to me, and I've talked about this before, but as I've gotten older, is all of a sudden my nose hair, my ear hair, and my eyebrow hair is on fire. I don't know if you've experienced this, and I cannot tell you how many times either Jill or my boys or somebody's like, Dad, you need to go to the bathroom and check this thing out. I've got one of these big things. Look at that right there. Should I just leave this up on the TV or whatever that's called, the screen? You're like, yes, a little bit longer. No, I will take that. We should take that off. That's a little bit bad. But my point is all of us have experienced that moment in our life where all of a sudden we were hit with this big dose of reality. And guys, as we continue this series that we kicked off last week I talked about and shared with you this gigantic dose of reality that Jesus gave us. In fact, if you weren't here last week, we're talking about culture and faith and when everything feels like they're colliding. And what I said last week is this. I said, in my lifetime, in my 46 years, I'm 46 years old, in 46 years of my life, I have never seen us in our culture, and I've never seen us in terms of faith more divided than we are. In fact, as I think about, politics, and as I think about, COVID and vaccines and masks, as I think about sexuality, as I think about free speech, pick whatever arena in culture. And guys, I'm just telling you in my life, I've never seen us this divided, this polarized, and what we're doing to one another. And that's not only true with culture, but as I said last week, in faith, I've never seen us this divided in faith. When I think about what's happened over the last few decades with faith and how many churches, when it comes to theology and it comes to doctrine, are like overnight changing their theology and doctrine, and then the division within the churches as a result of creating these huge camps in all these churches. And then you look in faith and you see, the abuse, you see the moral failures, you see all the division. You just kind of step back, or at least maybe this is just me. I step back and I look at culture and I look at faith and I'm like, man, they're so divided and it's so polarizing. And in everyday life, we feel that. This is in spite, regardless if you're a follower of Jesus or not. I think every single one of us, when you wake up, you feel the pressure of that. You feel this tug of war on your soul, either to assimilate or just to kind of go with the flow of culture, or you feel this tug of war in your soul to kind of go, man, can I just get some relief? Like, hey, today was going great, but then I got a text from my wife, or today was going good, but then I looked at the news and I'm like, here, I'm hit again with just all this just collision and all this all these things that are, seem to be broken. It just feels like, man, can I get some relief? Maybe for a week? Can I have just 1 week that just feels like, and the question we're asking throughout the series is, what do we do with that? What do we do when it feels like everything is colliding in faith, and everything's colliding in culture, and culture is colliding with faith, and faith is colliding with culture, and all this tension? How do we get clarity? How do we not contribute to the division and the brokenness that we see? And how do we get some relief from this emotional exhaustion? What is our way forward? And so we set that up last week, and we asked the question that we said, we need to understand what is. What's happening? What's reality? What's going on? That is foundational. We've got to start there. And in the midst of that question, Jesus gave us a gigantic dose of reality and said, listen, I love you, and I'm for you. In fact, I'm about to give my life for you, and I just want you to know that in this world, you will have trouble. That your exhaustion, that's real. That all this division and culture and everything, that's real. And this is not Jesus saying, hey, it kind of maybe sort of, you may have some trouble, it may be difficult in this world. No, this is Jesus in all caps saying, guys, this is the reality. You will have trouble every day of your life. That is the reality. And that is what is. And that's extraordinarily helpful because of what we said at the end of our time last week in the statement. I said, your level of disappointment is directly proportional to your level of expectation. And if you expect every day to wake up and find utopia, or if you think, hey, this is heaven on earth, and that God should always protect me, that I should never go through divorce, that my kids should always be safe, our health and our wealth and finances and business, God should prosper us. God should bless us all the time. That should be our reality. Then you will wake up perpetually discouraged. And the danger in that is you will most likely eventually walk away from that God. And God didn't say that. Through his son, Jesus Christ, who is your friend, who loves you and is for you, he goes, guys, you need to know in this world, every day, you will have trouble. Now, that is a great posture to start from, because when you start from that reality, it allows us to be more thankful. It allows us to be more grateful. It allows us perhaps to experience a little bit more joy and contentment. And Jesus was very clear. He said, guys, this is not your home. You are exiles. You are ambassadors. Your home is in the life to come. But in the meantime, because I'm your friend, because I love you and I'm for you, you just need to know that you will have trouble. But Jesus didn't leave us there. He actually gave us a way forward. He gave us some reality, and then he gave us a step. And look at what he said in John 16. Here's the whole verse in its context. He says, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. Guys, yeah, in this world you will have trouble, but there's a way to have peace. There's a way to have rest. There is a way forward. But take heart, he says, you can persevere. You can go from a place of just surviving to thriving in the midst of this. And the reason why is because I have overcome the world. So the question is, well, Jesus, how? How do we move forward? That's what is. The reality is this world is broken. Okay, and our home is the home to come. Appreciate that, Jesus. But how do I step into that peace? How do I experience life that I'm not mentally and physically and spiritually exhausted? How do we begin to step into that? What is it that I need to know? What is it we need to know? Well, what we need to know is actually found in an individual in history who lived 500 years before Jesus. And his name is Sun Tzu, and he actually was a Chinese general. And he wrote The Art of War, and in The Art of War, he gives us such incredible insight in terms of what we need to know. And I love what he says. Look at this. He says, if you know the enemy and you know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself, but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. I love what he says here, because Jesus paints the picture for you and for me, and this is so important to embrace, that life feels like a battle. And in the midst of the battle, you first and foremost need to understand your enemy. Who is your enemy? Who are you fighting against? Who's behind all this stuff that we're feeling and the division? And then you need to know yourself. So today what we're going to do is we're going to tackle the question, of who is your enemy. Who's the real battle against? And then next week, we'll pick it up from there. So who's your enemy? To answer the question. Well, Jesus was crystal clear in John chapter 8. He gives us our enemy. And in John 8, the setting is Jesus is talking to a large crowd. And in this crowd, there's some Jewish individuals and there's some Jewish religious leaders. And he's talking to the crowd and he's telling them who he is. He's saying, guys, I am the Messiah. I am the promised one. And I'm inviting you to believe in me. And he's giving them the evidence as to substantiate his statements. And several of the Jewish people are believing in Jesus. But the religious leaders of the day, they're so anti him. They're antagonistic against him. And so imagine that moment. You're standing there, you're watching Jesus speak, inviting people to believe in him, telling people who he is, and you're seeing some believe and some push against him. And that is the context we pick it up, where he answers the question, who's our enemy? And here's what he says. Check this out. To the Jews who had believed, because several of the Jews had believed, Jesus said, if you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. A very famous statement. And what Jesus is saying here to the crowd, he's going, guys, I have come to present the truth. Like there's a lot of truths out there, right? Everybody has my truth and your truth and all. I have come to present a truth. And this truth I'm here to present will actually set you free, will liberate you, will free you from the oppression you feel, will lead to what you desire. But there's a catch with this. This is the idea to go, you and I, we have our truth. We have our ideas. And Jesus is saying, if you're willing to die to those things, if you're willing to die to the things that you go, here's an idea, here's my truth, this is going to lead to freedom, what Jesus says is you're actually going to find is not only what you initially desired, that freedom, but you're going to find a greater freedom, a greater adventure, greater meaning in me. That my truth, the truth, it will set you free. But it will also require you to feel like you are dying to your truth and to your ideas to embrace Jesus' truth. And the crowd hears this, and some of the individuals in the crowd are going, man, I'm getting that, Jesus. Like, I'm beginning to experience that in my life. But the religious leaders are looking at Jesus going, you are off your rocker, Rabbi. In fact, look at what they said. They answered him, these are the religious leaders. We are Abraham's descendants, and we have never been slaves to anyone. How can you say that we shall be set free? I mean, Jesus, are you kidding me? We hold on to the truths of Abraham. We know these truths. We're not slaves to anything. Are you kidding me? Man, my truth is the truth that will set me free. So here they are, completely convinced they don't need the truth of Jesus. They're just fine. And look at what Jesus says. He gives them some insight, and he begins to unlock a little bit of a reality oftentimes we don't see. And he says, Jesus replied, very truly, I tell you, everyone who sins is a slave to sin. You see, religious leaders, I can see your greed. In the first century, you need to know, these Pharisees, they were beyond rich. They had an enormous amount of wealth, and they would give out of their wealth, and everybody thought they were so generous, but what Jesus knew is they gave a tiny little portion of it, and they were full of greed. He could see it. He could see their pride. He could see their selfishness. He could see their hypocrisy, their religious hypocrisy. And he was saying, I see that you are a slave to all of those sins, and I am here to give you a truth that actually is going to set you free. And then look at what he says. He continues and gives them more context. Now a slave has no permanent place in the family, but a son belongs to it forever. So if the Son, which is Jesus, sets you free, you will be free indeed. I know that you are Abraham's descendants. Guys, I get that you're holding on to those truths. Yet you are looking for a way to kill me. You're not even living towards those truths because you have no room for my word or my truth. And then he says, I'm telling you what I've seen in my Father's presence. And then look at this. And you are doing what you have heard from your father. Jesus goes, guys, we got two dads here. You have a father, and I have a father. Creates an enormous amount of tension. The crowd's going, Jesus, what are you getting at? And then look at what happens. They look at Jesus, and they say, we are not illegitimate children, they protested. The only father we have is God himself. And guys, this is such a dig at Jesus. And when you read it here, you go like, what's the big deal? I mean, they're just kind of pushing back on Jesus. Well, this is originally written in Greek. In the Greek, the word for illegitimate, there's an innuendo behind that. And the literal translation of what they're saying to Jesus in front of this crowd, imagine this, is they're saying to Jesus, we are not bastards like you. Jesus, we heard the story of Mary. We know what's up with that. We know that Joseph and the whole thing, and there was another man behind the scenes, most likely. I mean, that's kind of what we're suspecting. And you are a bastard. I mean, this is better than HBO and Showtime and Netflix. This is why I'm like, read your Bibles. I mean, this is like, what? This is happening? They're saying that to Jesus, the Son of the living God? Yeah. So the question is, well, how did he respond? What did he do? Did he push back? Look at what he responds with. He says this. He says, if God were your father, you would love me. For I have come here from God. I have not come on my own. God sent me. Why is my language not clear to you? Guys, I'm inviting you into something so much better. But you keep rejecting it, thinking you're just fine. I don't need your truth. Jesus' compassion continues to extend. But then he looks at him and he answers the question who our enemy is. And look at what he says. You belong to your father, the devil, and you want to carry out your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning, not holding on to the truth, for there is no truth in him. And then he says, when he lies, he speaks his native language. For he is a liar and the father of lies, yet because I tell you the truth, you do not believe me, because you have a different father. Now for Jesus, and this is really important you hear me clearly, for Jesus, in terms of our enemy is the devil. And throughout Scripture, Jesus talks about the devil. Now, here in John 8 is his most comprehensive teaching on the devil, but there are other places he speaks to the devil. And he gives us a greater context. In terms of the devil, here are some titles of the devil. He says, the evil one, the father of lies, the serpent of old, the one who masquerades, the murderer, the accuser, Satan, the deceiver, the tempter, the adversary, the destroyer. There's all kinds of context to who the devil is. But for Jesus, and this is really important, for Jesus, our enemy is the devil. Not a myth, not a figment of our imagination, not some pre-scientific explanation to explain the bad and the evil that's going on in the world, nor is the devil a cartoon. A lot of times we think it looks like this. In fact, this week I knew what I was talking about, and I talked to my 13-year-old son, Jonathan. I said, Jonathan, when you think of the devil, what do you think of? And he says, Dad, I just want to hug him. I just feel bad for him. I just want to hug him. He's our lover. And I'm like, this is a pastor's son saying he wants to hug the devil. Son, don't do that, Anyways, but I think for some, we think about the devil and we're like, oh, that's so cute, Torchy's tacos, the devil, whatever. Nor is the devil Will Ferrell from Saturday Night Live. If you've seen that skit with Garth Brooks where Garth Brooks, sells his soul to the devil, nor is the devil a talking snake. Now, again, for Jesus, our enemy is the devil. And when it comes to the devil, Jesus is teaching us that the devil is the invisible, very real intelligence behind so much evil in our souls and our society. Behind the division, behind the brokenness, behind the evil, there is a greater evil. That Jesus could have said to the crowd in that moment, gentlemen, everybody would look at him, yes, Rome is evil. Everybody would say, yes, and the emperors, the Caesar, all the evil and atrocities. Should we blame Rome or the emperor? Jesus would say, no, because there is an enemy behind the enemy that's driving that evil. For Jesus, our enemy is the devil. Now, guys, listen. If I'm sitting where you're sitting, or I'm listening to this, or I'm watching, or, sitting in my living room, or wherever you happen to be, when you hear about the devil, the invisible intelligence behind the evil, I understand, if you're going to be intellectually honest, that many of you would say, well, Buck, I'm not there. Like, that is really hard for me to get my mind around, this invisible intelligence that's driving the evil in my soul and in our society. That's hard for me to believe. And I would say that's fair. That's totally intellectually honest. I feel like that's a good pushback. And I would say, if we are going to be honest, I think we should consider some things when we're thinking about the things of old. And one of the things I think we should consider is called the Flynn effect. Now, the Flynn effect was from a gentleman named James Flynn in the 80s, and he was a sociologist, a researcher, and he came up with the idea that we today have a higher IQ and we are far more intelligent than our grandparents, which means that we are far more intelligent than the ancients, the people of old, the patriarchs. We have a much greater IQ. And guys, that narrative fits perfect into our culture. It fits like a perfect glove into a progressive culture, which says, hey, we are here to tell you what culture should be. We are here to tell you what morality should be. Hey, our ideas about the future of our culture, the future direction of life, are far superior than anyone before us because those before us were far less intelligent. They didn't have the IQ that we have. Now, that makes a lot of sense. But the problem is that the Flynn method has been debunked. No researcher today actually believes in the Flynn effect. In fact, James Flynn himself said it's totally wrong. It's not even a good premise. And yes, today we have far more knowledge and we have far more information. But listen, information and knowledge is not the same as intelligence and an IQ. And an intelligence and IQ is not the same as wisdom. In fact, if you want to look at the research, you should do this on your own. It's actually the opposite of what we think, and our IQs are going the opposite direction. That people long before us had equal IQs and were absolutely brilliant. And if we don't consider that in this discussion of just being intellectually honest with one another, we potentially will be guilty of what C.S. Lewis, the great theologian and writer, says is chronological snobbery. To think, my ideas are so much better. We're so much more sophisticated than those who've come before us. Now listen, you may hear all of that and you may go, well, Buck, that's interesting. Appreciate you sharing that. But at the end of the day, it's still really hard for me to get my mind around an invisible, intelligent evil behind the evil. And that's totally fair. So here's what I would say. For the next few minutes, I would just ask you to please consider suspending your judgment and just consider perhaps there's a different reality. In fact, for the next few minutes, I would ask you to consider maybe a couple of these questions. What if Jesus knows the true nature of reality better than you or better than me? What if Jesus actually understood what's going on in our lives, what's going on in culture, what the struggle is really about? Or perhaps think of this question. What if Jesus, the writers of the Bible, and the writers over the last 2 millennia have a better lens of understanding to dimension of reality? Well, what if they were actually onto something to explain the evil, to explain this brokenness, to explain this pressure, that regardless if you're a follower of Jesus or not, that we feel every day of our lives? So guys, I would just ask, would you be willing to suspend judgment just for a few minutes and consider, for Jesus, he would say, our enemy is the devil. And for Jesus, in John 8, his most comprehensive teaching on the devil, he gives us clarity to what his end goal is, that the end goal of the devil is murder, to wipe out all of life. That the end goal is to wipe out, not literally, although that could be, but in essence, figuratively, to wipe out and to murder your relationship, to murder your marriage, to murder your relationship and influence with your kids, to murder your identity and confuse the hell out of us when it comes to our identity, to murder relationships, to murder our culture. His end goal is to do everything he can to create confusion. Jesus says, that's the devil. And his means to accomplish this end goal, Jesus says, next slide, Jesus says, is lies. In fact, remember what he said? Jesus said in terms of the devil, he goes on and he says, the devil is a liar. He was a liar from the beginning. Next slide. Talks about that he speaks his native language, for he is a liar and the father of lies. And here's, if we can put it together, how this is so important to our discussion with culture and faith and all the collusion. For Jesus, yes, there are a lot of different teachings on the spiritual world beyond this world, but the primary teaching for Jesus in this world, in this culture, in your life, in my life, with the devil, is between lies and the truth. Lies and the truth. So guys, here's what I want to do for a second, and this is kind of risky, but I think you can handle it, and I'm just going to ask you to go with me. I want to pause this discussion, and I want you to hold what we just said in your minds, and we're going to come full circle back to it. But what I want to do is I want to pause and I want to ask you to take a big old breath, like, breathe in, get some oxygen in your mind, get some oxygen in your brain, take a big old sip of coffee again to get, the caffeine working. And what I want to do is I want to give you kind of a 30,000-foot view of a philosophy lesson. And when it comes to philosophy, listen, I took it in school. I barely passed it, just to be fully transparent with you. And I know enough to be dangerous, but just give me a lot of grace when it comes to philosophy. So if you're a philosophy major or you understand philosophy, you may just tear this apart. But anyways, here's what I think is so important to understand. The reason I'm willing to take this risk is because it's been so freeing, it's been so liberating, it's been so empowering to understand what I'm about to share with you, and I hope the same is true with you. So here we go. Here's our philosophy lesson. What is truth is the question that's been asked for 2,000 years. Pilate asked Jesus, what is truth? Well, the simplest definition of truth is truth equals reality. And reality, in terms of definition, reality equals what you run into when you're wrong. Think about it this way. Imagine this. Imagine if I believed my truth and I said my truth is I can fly. And I'm going to jump right here and I'm going to fly over you guys. Well, perhaps you would walk out at that point. But just imagine I do this and I back up and I begin running to you guys and I jump at you, right? And what's going to happen? Well, what's going to happen is I'm going to smash into reality. I'm going to take you all out, and it's going to be really, really embarrassing. And then you're going to look at me, and you're going to go, well, Buck, you know what happened? You got a dose of reality, or you got the cold, hard truth, or that cold, hard reality. See, truth equals reality, and reality is what you run into when you're wrong. And then we have lies. And lies equals unreality. Think of it this way. Something I talk about quite a bit here at Northpoint, if you've come, is the fact that I absolutely love Oreo cookies. And you probably think multiple times, move on, talk about something else. I just can't. I love them. I really do. So imagine if I have 6 Oreo cookies in my kitchen, and they're on my kitchen table, and I can't wait to eat my Oreo cookies. I'm so excited, and I walk into the kitchen, and they're gone. And I'm like, what's up with my Oreo cookies? And I look around, I'm walking around my house, I see Michael and Jonathan, my 13-year-old twins, and I look at them. I say, Michael, did you take my Oreos? Did you eat them? He looks at me and he's like, Dad, I promise I didn't. And I look at Jonathan. He's got all these Oreo crumbs all over his face, on the corner of his mouth, all over his fingers. And I look at Jonathan. I say, Jonathan, did you eat my Oreos? And he looks at me with his big old eyes. No, Dad, I promised I didn't eat your Oreos. Now, that would never happen in my house. They're pastor's children. They never lie, right? But imagine that moment. I mean, the reality presented to me confirms that is a lie. Truth equals reality. Reality equals what you run into when you're wrong. Lies equal unreality. Now, hold that in your mind. Most psychologists, or pretty much all psychologists, will talk about something you and I have called mental maps. Regardless if you're a follower of Jesus or not, we all have a mental map. We have literal mental maps in our mind that say, hey, I know how to get to work, I know how to get to school. I don't even have to think about it, right? You just get in your car, hit your gas, turn your wheel, and if your mental map's correct, you're gonna get there in 5 minutes, 15 or 30 minutes, however long it takes you to get to work or to get to school. Now, if your mental map is not correct, you'll get in your car, and maybe 40 minutes later, you'll end up in Elgin, which is not all that bad because there's good barbecue, right? But you'll be lost, right? Because your mental map is off. Now, we have a mental map for every aspect of our life. We have a mental map when it comes to money and love and romance and worth and value, sexuality, time, marriage. Every single one of us, regardless if you're a follower of Jesus or not, we have a mental map. And our mental maps are a collection of ideas. And ideas equal assumptions about reality. That you and I have an assumption about reality, that this idea is going to make me happy. This idea is going to set me free. This idea is going to enhance my life. We all have ideas. Happiness is an idea. Democracy is an idea. Theology is a collection of ideas around God put together. We all have ideas. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Just hang with me a second. That you and I are human, and that's a big deal to recognize. And as a human, you have the ability to imagine, you have the ability to project on the future, and as a human, what else you have the ability to do is to wonder. And the wonder of the human mind is our ability to consider both ideas that correspond to reality and that don't correspond to reality. So here's what that means. That you and I, at the same time, can hold two conflicting ideas. That one is true, one is a lie. That you and I can hold together two ideas in our mind that have good outcomes and bad outcomes, that appeal to our desires and our wants, and that completely go against our desires and wants. And we can act out on those ideas. And when we act out on those ideas, sometimes it makes the world a far better place. So many wonderful advancements in humanity have been created as a result of your capacity to be human and hold these ideas in your mind. At the same time, you can take these ideas that sound so wonderful, and they can poison your soul, and they can poison society. And Dallas Willard, a great philosopher, very influential early on in my life, he says, when it comes to ideas, we live at the mercy of our ideas. That every day of your ideas about life, your ideas about marriage, your ideas about morality, your ideas about sexuality, your ideas about money, that we are at the mercy of our ideas. Why? Here's why. Because the ideas we believe in our minds give shape to what we do with our lives. Because what an idea will do is come in your mind and it's neutral. It could be a lie, it could be a truth, but it's neutral. But then we grab it and we begin to believe it. And then we behave around it, and then we become that idea. Now here's the gigantic dose of reality with that philosophy lesson. It's this. Our mental maps, the collection of ideas we use to navigate life, are often wrong, horribly wrong, and lead us not to life, but to death. So, back to Jesus. Hang with me just for a couple more minutes. Jesus says our reality, our enemy, is the devil. His end goal is murder, to wipe out life. And his means to do this are ideas. And these are ideas that are laden with lies. They are full of lies, but man, they're enticing. And guys, let's just be honest about the devil and his ideas. Listen, the devil's not coming up to you in ideas and going, hey, by the way, Elvis is alive and he's in Mexico. Woo! It's like, whoa, big temptation. You know, the devil got me there. It's like, who cares? I mean, that's entertaining and fun. He's far more crafty. He's looking to outwit you. You know what his ideas sound like? His ideas sound like, don't you want to be happy? Doesn't God want you to be happy? His ideas sound like, aren't you far smarter than all those ridiculous, oppressive minds and people before you in history? His ideas sound like, man, money, it will buy you happiness. Go for it. And tell your family you're doing it for them. His ideas sound like, oh, she'll never change. He'll never change. That's just who he is. That's just who he is. His ideas sound like, good Lord, it's 2022. Wake up and free yourself. Why don't you liberate yourself and have some fun? Just do it. I mean, isn't God going to forgive you anyways? Isn't his grace big enough? Aren't you going to be washed white as snow tomorrow? So who cares? Don't you want to enjoy life? You only have one life to live, and this is kind of all there is, isn't there? His ideas sound like, did God really say that? Did God really? I mean, how can you tell? I mean, these ancient letters, who really knows? It's probably just a bunch of made up stuff. Did God really say that? Or here's an idea. Let's just play this out. An idea that I run into all the time. I'm on the other side of it as a pastor. I see the hurt and the pain this creates. But the idea, I'm unlovable. I am dirty. I am filthy. I am unlovable. And I'm unlovable because of what I've done. If you knew what I did 10 years, if you knew what I did to it, man, I am so unworthy of love and respect. I am completely unlovable. That's not true. That is completely not true. What's true is that you are made in the image of God with intrinsic worth and value. What gives you objective intrinsic worth and value is the fact that you're made in the image of God. That's what's true. But you are equally free to choose the idea you're going to choose. And you can choose the idea to go, hey, it's floating, it's neutral, I'm going to attach it, and I am unlovable. And then you begin to believe it, behave, and become. And now your marriage is influenced by it. And now your friendships are influenced by it. And now there's an insecurity on the other side of you that just is impacting everything. And there's this irritability, there's this anger that's coming on the other side of you. And before long, most people would say, yes, I agree, you are unlovable. And all of that started with an idea. Or how about this one in our culture that we've embraced for about 2 decades now, maybe longer, is the fact that you and I are simply just animals. You're just an animal. I mean, scientifically, objectively, you're just an animal. You're random, time, and chance. There is no real objective meaning. Now, we can emotionally get there, but not objectively get there. And as an animal, when we think about relationships, we think about marriage, we think about gender, we think about sexuality. I mean, are you kidding me? That's just a social construct from the patriarchs of old that are trying to oppress you. And therefore, we should begin to embrace something far better than those ideas. I mean, it's 2022. Come on, grow up, be you, and just be whatever you want to be. And so we can choose to do that. And we can begin to throw out all the things that the patriarchs have done, kind of throw out the baby in the bathwater, and adopt this brand new idea that we are liberated, that we're no longer going to be oppressed, that we are simply animals. And as animals, sexually, it's just biology. Sexually, it's just play. Sexually, it's fine to do whatever you want. Come on. And before long, as those ideas work themselves out in our culture, we have movements like Me Too. And now we have women who are oppressed and dehumanized based on an idea. Now, guys, we could keep going and going. Pick any idea in culture. Pick anything we're divided on in culture today. And it started with an idea. And if you don't believe that, just turn on the news. And for 13 seconds, you back up and you're like, whoa, look at all the division. And they all started with an idea. And here's the lie beyond the lie, is when those ideas are all going, and there's the division and everybody's like against and we feel so polarized, then we're like, you know what? Well, the person who's responsible for this is Biden. I mean, you voted for Biden, didn't you? How dare you? The person responsible for this is Trump. If we just have gotten Trump out earlier, I mean, oh my gosh. And we begin fighting and the attack, the gap gets wider and wider and we become more polarized as a culture. And the Apostle Paul says, what are you doing? You think your enemy is actually that? The Apostle Paul 2,000 years ago was far ahead of us. And he says, man, our struggle is not against flesh and blood. You keep fighting, thinking your enemy's this. There's an evil behind the evil. It's against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. For Jesus, our enemy is the devil. And he is very determined to wipe us out. And his method, what he uses to carry these lies, are ideas coming your way every single day. And this explains why Jesus didn't come on a horse with a sword, as so many Jewish people thought the Messiah would come this way and rule over. No. How did Jesus come into this world? As a teacher, as a rabbi, with ideas. That Jesus said, I am the truth. I am the life. I am the way. I am here to give you the truth. And this truth will set you free. But you got to trust me. You got to trust me. So, let me just ask. Are you believing any lies? Is there anything that you currently are holding on to that perhaps is a lie? Or, let me ask it a different way. Are there any ideas that you are tempted to believe or are believing that are not congruent with Jesus' reality, creation, or design for our lives? And this is a hard one. This is a little bit of a pickle. Because, the things you're tempted to believe, you think are good for you. And the things you are holding on to, you actually believe that idea is good for you. And so perhaps this week, one of the things I would really encourage you to do is just open your palms for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and just invite God into that space and say, God, are there any ideas that I'm tempted to believe or I am believing that aren't aligned with your design, with your plans? And invite God into that moment to bring it to your imagination, to bring it to the front of your mind. And then whatever that idea may be, would you then be willing to share with someone the lie you are tempted to believe or are believing? Someone you can trust, like a counselor, maybe a pastor. Somebody as maybe a small group leader who's not going to preach another sermon to you, but may just open the Bible and speak the very words of Jesus and his design and his creation into those lies. See, guys, the question is, what do we do when we feel all this division in culture and faith? First and foremost, we got to know what is. What is happening? What is reality? Well, Jesus gave us that context. And secondly, we need to understand who's our enemy. Who's your enemy? And Jesus gave us lots of clarity. One will lead to life, and the other will lead to death. Jesus has invited you into the truth that will set you free. Let me pray for us. Father, thank you again for today and just that we can have this discussion and think about such things. God, you know where all of us are at. You know what we're bringing into the room, what we're bringing online, what we're thinking. So, Father, would you give us the insight to know the lies that we're tempted, to know the lies that we're stepping into? And would you give us the courage just to admit that? And perhaps the courage to bring it to you and begin to live the truths that you've invited us into. God, you can handle that. Thank you for today. In Jesus' name, amen. Guys, thanks so much for being here. I'll see you next week.